Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. UFC 287, Alex Pereira versus Israel Adesanya 2 is almost here, and this is an incredible fight card, and I am going to go through the entire pay-per-view main card of UFC 287, briefly discuss each fight, and then at the end of the video, I am going to grade UFC 287 on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being the worst pay-per-view ever, 10 being the greatest pay-per-view of all time, and I'm going to answer the question whether or not UFC 287 is worth your money should you buy this pay-per-view. Now, before I get into anything, I'm going to briefly show you the entire main card of UFC 287, and before you even hear my opinion, comment down below what grade would you give UFC 287 on a scale from 1 to 10. Now, before I get into talking about the fights, how do I grade a UFC fight card? I have 3 factors that I think are most important when I grade a fight card. The first is relevance to the division. Is it a title fight? Is it a contender fight? Is it a fight that a guy's trying to make his way into the top 10? 2, what's the skill set of the fighters? Are they the elite of the elite? Are they very, very highly skilled, but just not up there with the elite of the elite? Or are they absolute trash cans? And lastly, you hear it all the time, styles make fights. And is this matchup going to be an exciting fight? Will it most likely produce an exciting fight? I think that's a very important factor when determining how good a fight card is. Now, starting off with the fight that opens up the main card, I'm not talking about the prelims. I'm only talking about the pay-per-view portion of this card, and that is Raul Rozas Jr. versus Christian Rodriguez. And this is a fight I'm really looking forward to. Raul Rozas Jr., only 18 years old, looked very good in his fight against Jay Perrin. But honestly, I think this fight should be on the prelims. It's kind of a wonky bout order here. I feel like Chris Curtis versus Kelvin Gastelum should be opening up the pay-per-view main card of UFC 287. And for me, the UFC is clearly trying to build Raul Rozas Jr. into a massive star. And he's talking about he's going to become the youngest champion. And he may very well be. He's only 18 years old. I just wished with how good he looked in his last fight against Jay Perrin, they gave him a massive step up in competition. Nothing crazy, but just a little bigger step up in competition than a very young and a very early in his MMA career as well in Christian Rodriguez. I'm not saying this fight doesn't make sense, but at the same time, with the way they're kind of pushing Raul Rozas Jr. in terms of promoting him, I wish they gave him a bigger step up in competition. Christian Rodriguez, you know, he's coming off a good win over Joshua Weems, where I believe he got the submission in the first round as well. And I do think this will be an exciting fight, but I just wish it was a bigger step up for Raul Rozas Jr., and I feel like this fight should be on the prelims. And in terms of their skill level, Raul Rozas Jr. has looked very good, but he hasn't really fought the best competition. So I don't really know how good either one of these guys are because they're still very early on in their MMA career. But nonetheless, it's a very good fight. It's a very interesting fight. Anytime you have an 18-year-old Raul Rozas Jr. in a fight in the UFC, it's going to be interesting. But there's just a couple factors that kind of makes this fight a little bit less appealing. Moving up on the card, we have Kevin Holland versus Santiago Ponzinibbio. 2 guys who are basically gatekeepers to the top 15 of the welterweight division. Both guys, even though they're not ranked, the welterweight division is a very good division, and I believe both of these guys are still highly skilled fighters. And I think this fight, even though it doesn't have ramifications within the welterweight division, there's still massive stakes on the line because Kevin Holland, you know, he had mixed success at middleweight, and he moved down to welterweight, and he started to put a few wins together. Then he ran into Khamzat Chimaev, who just ran him over. Then he got a favorable matchup against Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, who's getting up there in age and, you know, doesn't even want to fight anyone who's wrestled in middle school. And Stephen Wonderboy Thompson beat the brakes off of him and ends up getting a finish in that fight. And so Kevin Holland, this is kind of a must-win for him. Then you have Santiago Ponzinibbio, who he was once a welterweight title contender. And now he's outside the rankings. He fought a short-notice Alex Morono in his last fight and almost lost, but he got the 3rd round finish. Now, I do think this is a very exciting fight, and I do think, you know, this is one of those fights where will the young eat the old? You have Kevin Holland, who's only 30 years old. Ponzinibbio, he's had a lot of injuries. He's spent a lot of time on the shelf over the past few years. He's 36 years old. If he ever wants to try to make another run at a title, the time is now. I don't think ultimately he's going to be able to do it, but, you know, he has to go out there and beat a guy like Kevin Holland, who in this fight is in a must-win situation. And I think both guys are very good strikers. I think both guys have a very good skill set. And I do think this is a fan-friendly matchup. I do believe this fight will be exciting. I do believe there will be a high level of skill shown. But ultimately, it doesn't mean a whole lot in the division. But I think this is a very good fight nonetheless. Moving up on the card, one of the fights on the card that I'm really looking forward to that's really getting massively overlooked, and that is Rob Font versus Adrian Yanez. This is a massive fight. This is a massive step up for Adrian Yanez. In his last fight, he fought an absolute trash can Tony Kelly, who he beat. He TKO'd in the first round, who is no longer in the UFC. But you have Rob Font, who's on a 2-fight losing streak, but losing to the best of the best. And Rob Font is ranked number 6 in the division. Yanez is ranked number 12 in the division. This is a fight that matters in a stacked bantamweight division, and it is a massive step up in competition for Adrian Yanez. And for Rob Font, this is kind of a must-win scenario for him too. He's on a 2-fight losing streak, but it's against the best of the best. It's against Marlon Chita Vera. It's against Jose Aldo. 2 top-tier bantamweight fighters. I know Marlon Vera just lost, but nonetheless, it's not a bad loss to have on your resume. And it's going to be very interesting because Yanez, even though he's ranked number 12, he really hasn't fought the best level of fighters at bantamweight. And the bantamweight division, I believe, is the most talent-rich division in the UFC. And I believe this is a phenomenal matchup. Yanez has shown great striking, elite-level boxing, good knockout power, but against not the greatest of competition. And Rob Font has super underrated striking. He has pillow hands, but he's also very well-rounded. He has good wrestling as well. So I think this is a very interesting fight. How is Yanez going to look in this massive step up? We've seen it, in the lightweight division in particular recently, where Mateusz Gamrot gets a step up against Beneil Dariush. Beneil Dariush sends him to the back of the line. We've seen it recently where you see a guy like Jalen Turner kind of get a step up against Gamrot, kind of get sent back to the line. Rafael Fiziev gets a step up against Justin Gaethje, gets sent back of the line. How is Yanez going to look in the bantamweight division against a proven elite fighter in Rob Font, who I know he's on a bit of a downturn, but he still is a top 10 ranked bantamweight fighter. And as far as skill sets, both guys are very highly skilled. Yanez a little bit more unknown just because of the level of competition he's fought, but Font has looked incredible in his wins. And I know, again, he's on the decline a little bit. He's coming off a couple losses. But there's also no doubt in my mind this will be an exciting fight. Yanez always goes out there and performs. Rob Font is always going out there and throwing great combination and looking very crisp on the feet. And sometimes he mixes in the grappling as well. But there is no doubt that Rob Font versus Adrian Yanez will be exciting at UFC 287. And this is one of the most overlooked matchups on the card. Moving on to the co-main event, we have Gilbert Burns versus Jorge Masvidal. This is a fight that I'm really looking forward to. You have Gilbert Burns, who's coming off that domination of Neil Magny. And then you have Jorge Masvidal, who talk about must win. He's getting up there in age, and he's on a 3-fight losing streak. He got 50-45 by Colby in his last fight. He got brutally KO'd by Kamaru Usman in the fight before that. And then he got 50-45 by Kamaru Usman in the fight before that. This is must win for Jorge Masvidal. And also, there's massive stakes on the line because I know Dana White has committed. He's saying Colby Covington is fighting Leon Edwards next. I believe that fight will probably happen, but I think if Jorge Masvidal beats Gilbert Burns, a lot of people are talking about him jumping in front of Colby. I don't think he needs to jump in front of Colby because I think the UFC has shown they will play favoritism towards people who can sell pay-per-views. And Jorge Masvidal, with that flying knee win over Ben Askren, became a star in the UFC. And I could see if Jorge Masvidal wins this fight, I could totally see the UFC tell him to wait it out and he can fight the winner of Leon Edwards or Colby Covington. Because no matter which one of those fights happens, there's a massive backstory and Jorge Masvidal will draw in pay-per-view buys, and the UFC would definitely do that. And also, I know a lot of people are expecting Gilbert Burns to blow Jorge Masvidal out of the water just because he's lost 3 in a row. He looks like he's on the decline. He's not the greatest defensive wrestler. But Masvidal, I think he's being overlooked a bit because he has very good striking. He has very good power. And, even in the Colby fight, Colby's relentless with the pace. But Jorge Masvidal has decent takedown defense. And he's not getting submitted on the ground. We've seen Damian Maia take him down. Wasn't able to submit him. And then you have the factor that Gilbert Burns is a little bit chinny. He's shown in the past. I think Kamaru Usman rocked him with a jab in their fight. He got finished by Dan Hooker when he was fighting down at lightweight. I think this is a very compelling fight. I think both guys are looking to try to get back in the mix in the welterweight division. And for Jorge Masvidal, he can't go on a 4-fight losing streak. That's not going to be good. This is a must win for Jorge Masvidal. And for Gilbert Burns, he's kind of been trading wins and losses. He's been taking super hard fights. He fought Khamzat Chimaev when nobody wanted to fight Khamzat Chimaev and ultimately lost, but it was a very close fight, a lot closer than people were giving him credit for. I think this is a very big fight. I think it's a very interesting stylistic matchup. I think it will be exciting for however long it goes. Can Gilbert Burns get a finish? I think Gilbert Burns could go out there and get a finish, even TKO Jorge Masvidal. How is Jorge Masvidal's chin going to be after that Kamaru Usman KO? I know Colby wasn't able to exploit it, but who expected Colby to be able to exploit it with his pillow punches? So I think this is a very interesting matchup. I think it has ramifications within the division, even if we don't necessarily like it. And I do think stylistically, this will be a very exciting fight. Moving on to the main event, we have Alex Pereira versus Israel Adesanya 2. I am dying to see this fight. I am so excited to see this fight. This is an amazing stylistic matchup, and this is two of the elite at 185 pounds and two of the best kickboxers on the planet. And not only that, it has such an amazing backstory. You have the fact that they fought twice back in kickboxing. One where Alex Pereira wins via decision, where a lot of people think that Adesanya got robbed. Then in the second fight in kickboxing, Adesanya's winning even hurts Pereira, and then Pereira comes back and finishes Adesanya. And then he follows Adesanya over to MMA in the UFC, gets a couple wins, gets fast-tracked to a title shot, and ends up losing the majority of the rounds, only winning round 2. And then in the 5th round, knowing that he's down on the scorecards, goes out there and finds a TKO over Adesanya to win the middleweight belt. And essentially in combat sports, go up 3-0 over Adesanya, which is a common thing that people have been regurgitating out there over and over and over again. And this is a massive storyline. This is a massive fight. These guys are so good. They're so elite. I just recently went back and watched the UFC 281 main event, the first fight in MMA between these guys. This was one of the best fights of 2022. I could watch that fight over and over and over again. It was an incredible fight. And then to have Pereira come back in the 5th round in the fashion that he did, absolutely incredible. And now this is must win for Adesanya. Because forget about those kickboxing fights. Forget about the fact that people are saying, oh, Pereira's 3-0 against Izzy. If you lose twice to a champion, most likely you're not getting a 3rd shot. So for Adesanya, the pressure is ultimately on his shoulders here in this fight. Because if he loses to Pereira again, he's not getting a 3rd fight in MMA against Pereira because now he's lost twice. And so he's going to be kind of in no man's land. He's going to be in that Max Holloway type territory where he's not getting a title shot, but the UFC want him knocking off contenders. And essentially what he's going to have to wait for is somebody to come up and out-wrestle Alex Pereira, or Pereira decide to go up to 205 pounds. But ultimately, this main event is top-notch. I cannot wait. I am dying to see this fight. It's going to be super high level. There's super high stakes, and it has an amazing backstory. I don't need trash talking back and forth. I could not be more excited for Alex Pereira versus Israel Adesanya 2. And just to watch these guys leg kick battle alone. Forget about the punches. Forget about the body kicks. Forget about the spinning heel kicks. Just the leg kick battle alone. I am excited to see Pereira versus Adesanya in this fight. And for Alex Pereira, it's going to be very interesting because how long can he keep this weight cut up? He is cutting a lot of weight. He is cutting weight 3 weeks out. So how long is he going to stick around in the 185-pound division? He may win this fight. He may decide to go up to 205 pounds. So this could be the last time we ever see these two guys fight. If Adesanya wins, there could be a trilogy fight in MMA. So there's just so many different angles you can look at this main event. And honestly, this main event alone is worth the price of the pay-per-view. So I'm really dying to see this fight card. I'm super excited for UFC 287. Now, as far as how would I score UFC 287? I mean, every single fight, there's really not a fight I can complain too much about. The only fight I can complain about is I wish Raul Rozas Jr. got a bigger step up in competition, but that's such a mild complaint. Kevin Holland, Santiago Ponzinibbio, great fight. Both guys have great skills, just not relevant, super relevant to the division. Rob Font, Adrian Yanez, massively overlooked, should be super exciting. Gilbert Burns, Jorge Masvidal should be super exciting, massive stakes on the line. And of course, the main event, which I just went over in depth, which I am dying to see. I think this fight card is the best fight card on paper of 2023. I think it exceeds UFC 285 on paper. And, you know, obviously we'll have to see how it plays out. UFC 285 was a little bit anticlimactic with the main event. But nonetheless, on paper, everyone was super excited to see UFC 285, and it was a great card on paper. I think UFC 287 exceeds that on paper, and that's why I will give UFC 287 an 8.5 out of 10. And honestly, if you bumped Raul Rozas Jr. versus Christian Rodriguez down to the prelims, and you bumped up Chris Curtis versus Kelvin Gastelum to the main card, this would be like a 9 or a 9.5 out of 10. That's how incredible this fight card would be. But I'm just grading the pay-per-view main card. I'm not grading all the prelims and everything like that. And as far as should you buy this pay-per-view, absolutely you should buy this pay-per-view. This is a historic main event. It has a lot of notable fighters on the card. And these matchups stylistically should deliver exciting fights. So I'm really looking forward to UFC 287. I think just the main event alone, if it was just Alex Pereira versus Israel Adesanya 2, I'd be willing to pay the $80 for the UFC pay-per-view. That's how good this main event is. I believe this is can't miss. You must watch UFC 287, even if you're a casual MMA fan. That's how good this card is. And you have to tune in right as the main card starts. Honestly, you have to tune in as soon as the prelims start because you can't miss Chris Curtis versus Kelvin Gastelum as well. Let me know what you guys think about my grade down in the comments. Should I have given it a 9? What do you think? What grade would you give it? Would you give it lesser of a grade? And also, don't forget to check out my other UFC 287 content. I will link the playlist down in the description as well as the end cards if you want to go check it out after this. Make sure to like the video, and thank you so much for watching.